This is the Hohem iSteady Mobile Plus, and at the time of making this video, you can buy for $99. And I think for that kind of money, this is phenomenal. And yes, it's not perfect, and there are a few areas where there is room for improvement. But for this kind of money, what you get out of this gimbal is incredible value for money. This gimbal is about $159. The Hohem gimbal is $99. In my opinion, the Hohem gimbal gives you so much more functionality, and it actually behaves as a gimbal is supposed to behave. And yes, portability is not the same. This is the only thing, in my opinion, that the OM6 is actually better than pretty much any gimbal out there. But if you're looking for a gimbal that behaves as a gimbal is supposed to behave, and you don't want to spend as much as the OM6, or the cost of the OM6 is the sort of budget that you have, this for $99, I think, in my opinion, is unbeatable at this moment in time. There are a couple of things on this gimbal that I don't particularly like. I can understand that in this price range, when it's below $100, maybe they had to compromise somewhere. And one of those things is that you don't have locks. So when you're carrying this gimbal around, you don't have the ability to lock the gimbal in position so that things don't move around. Is this a deal breaker? I don't think so, compared to what you get out of this gimbal for the price, but this is something worth mentioning. The camera is actually fairly good, and once you go into the Pro mode, you get all the adjustments that you could possibly need. You get to adjust the ISO, the shutter speed, the white balance. So in that regard, that's actually very good. But you can only use it at 30 and 60 frames per second. So if you shoot at 24 and 25, the app is no good. So in my opinion, if you are serious about filming content with this gimbal, you're gonna have to use a third-party app. But I still think you get such an incredible value for money with this gimbal. And just as with the OM6, this gimbal doesn't have the ability to flip around. So if you want to vlog with the rear lens, you're gonna have to mount the phone facing away so that the rear lens is facing you. You're talking about $99. I can show you gimbals that are worth $300-400 that obviously they have that feature, but this gimbal is about 30 or 40% cheaper than the DJI OM6. It's gonna save you a ton of money, and it actually genuinely works like a proper gimbal. Yes, it's slower than the OM6, where you just tap on the mode and the gimbal turns horizontal or vertical. But if I wanted to do vertical, all I need to do is just turn it off. And the whole thing takes about 10 seconds, depending on how fast you can do and whether you have accessories or not. It's a compromise that I'm more than happy to take, for the simple fact that if I am filming horizontal, I am pretty much filming everything horizontal. And if I'm doing anything vertical, I'm pretty much filming everything vertical. It's not something that I switch from one to the other. So once you start filming in the day, vertical or horizontal, you are likely to stay in that position. If you set your gimbal on a table and you talk to the gimbal vertically, you're gonna see this motor on the frame, okay? But if you are doing any filming and you hold it slightly angled, as you are supposed to hold the gimbal, because that's how the 3 axes are working, you don't have that problem. Now, the same applies if you use an ultra wide. If you hold the gimbal like this, you have no problem. You get a really nice ultra wide shot. But if you set it on the table, you're gonna see this motor or bracket, whatever you wanna call it, okay? So these are some limitations that I find about this gimbal filming upright. If you shoot horizontal, you have no problem with this bracket, okay? If you use the ultra wide, you get to see on the edge of the frame this bracket, okay? Now, if you film with the gimbal and you hold it like this, slightly angled, you have no problem. You don't see the bracket. It's only when you set it up right. This is a limitation when you compare it to what the gimbals like the Crane M3 or the Scorp Mini or even the Phaeton G6 Max offer, okay? But these gimbals are 2, 3, or even 4 times as much. So, you know, what you're getting with this gimbal is a compromise. It works great, but it has some slight limitations. Now, you need to decide whether those limitations apply to you or not, because for most people, this gimbal really and truly is going to be all you ever need. Balancing this gimbal is really easy, and in a way, it reminds me a lot of the Smooth 4, because you will have to get yourself a set of counterweights, because the moment you put a lens on this end of the phone, the motors are not strong enough and they will give way. You can get away with a filter, but if you want to have the flexibility of things well balanced, you're gonna have to get some universal counterweights that you can clip on this end of the gimbal, and then the gimbal works really well. It has an advertised payload of 280 grams, but I've tested with 348 grams and it works really well as long as you have this set of counterweights, okay? Because otherwise you are pretty much limited to using the phone on its own. Now, if you shoot at 30 or 60 frames per second, then the app is great and the integration with the gimbal is fantastic. You get a zoom rocker here on the gimbal itself, so it's actually very smooth. And what I worked out is that there is a setting on the gimbal itself that you can adjust the speed of the zooming range. So filming while you zoom in or out is actually possible in this gimbal because it goes really, really slow. And I found out really surprising, because up until now, most gimbals, when you zoom in or out, it's kind of quite fast and abrupt. You know, you sort of go like, you know, jumps on the frame. And on the app itself, you know, you get everything that pretty much any other app gives you: manual controls, auto controls, you get hyperlapse, time lapse, which actually works really well. You set your keyframes and every other setting that you need on the time lapse, and it works really smooth. Actually, surprisingly smooth, I have to say. You know, for $99, I mean, that I still don't believe they managed to give such an amazing value for money for $99. But look, the app works great as long as you shoot at 30 and 60 frames per second. And I shouldn't forget to mention that on the app itself, you also get the ability to shoot at slow-mo 240 frames per second, but only at 720 and 1080p. And you also get these gimmicky features or edits or montages, just as the OM6 have, where the gimbal does some preset edits. So in general terms, the app in itself is really well implemented and it works really well, and it's really fast to load, I have to say. It's just such a shame that they don't have 24 and 25, because if they did, I would actually use the app. You know, it's not bad. I mean, obviously it has some limitations. You can't shoot on HDR and you don't shoot on ProRes as you do with Filmic Pro, but we could go on to a different video about these things and whether they are even useful to most people. It's probably not. And just like every other gimbal out there these days, you get the option to switch between different modes on the gimbal itself. And you get the usual ones: the tilt lock, the follow mode, the full lock, the FPV, and the inception or rotating mode. So they're all very easy to access. You don't need to go on the app. So if you use a third-party app, this is great because you genuinely don't need to go into the app for pretty much anything. Okay, now you get a joystick that is actually really smooth, really well made, and you can go into the app and adjust the speed, whether you want it fast, medium, or slow. I have all the settings done to slow, except the motors on medium. And the same applies for the zoom rocker. Okay, you can adjust how fast or slow you want it to be, and you actually get a slider. You can go from 100 to pretty much 1 or 2. So I have it down to 2, and it goes really, really slow. And then you got your record button that if you use the default iPhone camera app, it actually works with it. You press record and the iPhone app will start recording. It doesn't work with all the other third-party apps that I've tested. So if you are someone that shoots with a default iPhone camera app, well, that's some integration that you get there. It comes down to, what do you want from a gimbal? Do you want a gimbal that fits in your pocket and is very portable, but it's horrible in terms of tilt range and restriction of movements. Okay, so if you are happy to be using a gimbal like this, then maybe this is good for you. You know, if you want a gimbal to behave as a gimbal is supposed to behave, the Hohem is a no-brainer. Now, another aspect is that you can attach a monopod to this gimbal and do crane or jib shots, and I've done a video some months ago about different shots that you can achieve, and I put a link somewhere up here if you want to see some crazy shots that you can do with a gimbal and a monopod. But if you want to do that, you can do this with this gimbal, okay, because you have no restrictions on the up and down movement. Now with this gimbal, with OM6, that's just impossible, because you're gonna have to have the monopod and the pole maybe 3-4 feet on and go like this and then go like this, and it's just laughable, really. It's not gonna happen. Now, just as with the DJI OM6, you get a tracking feature on the iSteady Mobile Plus, and you get to track faces and objects, and it's actually really well implemented. It works really well. I would say just as good, if not better, than on the OM6. Now, I have a reservation about tracking on these gimbals, not just on this gimbal, but on pretty much every other gimbal out there, for the simple fact that whatever it is that this gimbal track usually is kept in the middle of the frame, or you want to have a very small headroom on the frame if you are talking to camera. Usually that's just impossible because everything is kept in the middle, so you end up with a massive headroom above your head, or always in the middle of the frame. So that's a reservation that I have about this feature that I don't really use ever. But this may or may not be something important to you. The important thing is that it has it. It's whether you can use it, because back to what I said earlier, if you film at 24 or 25 frames per second, well, you don't have those frame rates on the Hohem app. So that's not something that you can even use. And all you can do is just wait for Hohem to do it, if they ever do it. Otherwise, you know, you just use a third-party app and forget about the tracking feature, which, trust me when I tell you, is not something that you are really gonna miss. Now, the user experience with this gimbal is actually really good, and the ergonomics are surprisingly good. So holding this gimbal feels really nice, and as a whole, it's a genuinely good and nice experience. You have an additional 1/4-inch thread, so if you want to use any additional accessories, whether it's a light or a microphone, you can easily mount it here. This is really, really helpful. And, you know, in overall terms, you know, this gimbal works as a gimbal is supposed to do. Yes, it's a bit bigger than the OM6. Usually when you use a gimbal on your filming, you have planned for it, so it's something that you have allocated time and space for it. It's not something that you carry in your pocket and you simply improvise using a gimbal. So in my opinion, I don't think that is a real issue. The fact that the motors don't lock, it's a bit of a bummer, but what you're getting for $99, it's really, really good. So what do I think about this gimbal? Is this a good gimbal to buy? Would I recommend it? I would say yes. For $99, there is not much out there that will beat this. Every single control is at the front of the gimbal. It's very easy to operate. You can't miss it. I mean, the record button is well labeled. The modes are easy to change. Everything is really easy about this gimbal. And yes, there are plenty of room for improvement in other areas. But if you're looking at spending around $100, this gimbal is really, really good. And if what you're looking for is a video comparison between different gimbals in different price ranges and what each of them offers over the other, I've got this video here in which I go through all of them and more. So click on it and I'll see you there.